And reporting on violent clashes taking place throughout the country. In Cairo, in Alexandria, in Suez, you're looking at tape pictures of the situation in the Egyptian capital. Earlier in the hour, when we were speaking to our Ben Wiedemann live in Cairo, he showed to us, and we saw it live on our screens, smoke rising in central Cairo. Police have been using a number of containment tactics to rein in the protesters. They've been using water cannons. They've been using tear gas against the protesters. They've also been scuffling with members of the press. In fact, our crew in Cairo, they had a confrontation with police. Ben Wiedemann and his crew, they encountered plainclothes police officers who grabbed a camera from them and took it away. So clearly tensions are indeed very high this Friday in Egypt. Our Fred Pleiken, he is also reporting there in Cairo, and he filed this for us earlier.
The people and the security forces here in the Egyptian capital of Cairo are bracing for what many believe could be the largest protests since the movement started a couple of days ago. I can show you that right now security forces are lining up throughout the city, even outside our office here, which is in downtown Cairo. So you can see security forces really amassing in a lot of these places, especially in downtown Cairo in a place called Tahrir Square, which really is the place where all of these protests basically started a couple of days ago. More and more police are coming there, also plainclothes police officers. So clearly the security forces are gearing up for a very big and possibly pivotal day here in this country's history. Also, internet services here in Egypt continue to be down, as well as cell phone. It's almost impossible to communicate. There is one small little internet provider called Noor, which apparently is still working. And people on Twitter are asking folks here in Egypt who have an account with Noor to open their passwords so more people can access it. We've also heard of activists going door to door in certain neighborhoods and asking people to come to these protests today. They're expecting anywhere upward of 1 million people if, in fact, things pan out the way they wanted to and the way they've been organized on Facebook. Now, the other thing that happened is that the leader of a prominent and the biggest opposition movement here in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood, was arrested in the night. However, the Muslim Brotherhood also saying that they are still planning on attending and participating in these protests. So certainly this is something that could be very, very big. The security forces are bracing for it, and it appears as though in the coming hours all of this could get very large and kick off. Fred Pleiken, CNN, Cairo, Egypt.
And that report filed by Fred Pleiken earlier in this day, before we saw an escalation in the protest. Thousands of protesters turning out not only in the Egyptian capital, but also in Suez and Alexandria. And as the number of protesters grows, and as some call for the ouster of the Egyptian president, Hosni Mubarak, our Brian Todd wonders whether they have thought about what might happen to Egypt after he's gone.
On the streets, in their Twitter and Facebook messages, the young catalysts of the uprising in Egypt leave no doubt about their objective: to drive out an 82-year-old president who's ruled them with an iron hand for as long as many of them have been alive. But that presents a problem. Hosni Mubarak's been in power so long, he'd leave a gaping void, which could be exploited by several militant groups that he's been crushing for decades.
If there's a period of real instability in Egypt, will that create an opportunity for some of these old groups to sort of reinvigorate themselves? I think at this point there's no sign of that, but I'm sure that that's something we do need to be aware of.
Brian Fishman and other experts point to groups that have been banned by Mubarak's government, like the Muslim Brotherhood. The Brotherhood lived by the gun long ago, but in recent years has become much more moderate, moved away from violence, and toward providing social services through Islamic charities. Still, there are other Egyptian opposition figures who favor a more brutal approach.
Ayman al-Zawahiri, the number 2 in al-Qaeda, was an Egyptian. He still has an enormous following in Egypt among very radical Islamic extremists.
Al-Zawahiri's been gunning for Mubarak for decades, and experts say he may make a public statement during these protests. But he's on the run, and his old group, Egyptian Islamic Jihad, has been absorbed into al-Qaeda. Another faction, called the Islamic Group, has massacred tourists and once came close to assassinating Mubarak. But experts say many of its members are hiding out with al-Qaeda in Pakistan. And its spiritual leader, Omar Abd al-Rahman, also known as the Blind Sheikh, is serving a life sentence in the U.S. for his role in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. These groups are down, experts say, but not necessarily out. You foresee, though, a scenario where militants could rise up and actually take some power or influence. What's that scenario?
I think the danger scenario here, where jihadi groups and militant groups might be able to increase their influence in Egypt, is if the government crushes these protests violently in a way that doesn't create any reform.
Then, says Brian Fishman, al-Qaeda and other militant groups might jump in and tell Egyptians that peaceful protests don't work and that violence is the only way to bring the change you want. Brian Todd, CNN, Washington.